This is the intro now.
All right, welcome to Tougies Take, episode 24 for Friday, May 14th, 2021. Hopefully the year of the cat. We'll see. Tougie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, buddy. I mean, it's going to be an interesting show today. We did our playoff preview in the last one, so today we'll be covering, a bunch of different odds and ends, bunch of different talking points, but I think it's going to make for a pretty interesting and hopefully a pretty good show.
Yeah, we finally have the playoff matchup cemented. Even though it looks like the Canadian season's going to go on through September, we will see what happens. So before we stretch before we pull a hip adductor, like I did this week, let's start with some warmies.
Now, was that before or after you rode your bike post? Oh God, I don't even remember.
So
what that...
it's just from skating. It's from being a 180-pound man ice skating for the first time in 3 years over the last few weeks.
Right.
It's a lot of weight to put on Florida ice, which is really some sort of dark miracle. There is some magic there that is tapping into evil powers. So speaking of evil powers, on today's Warmies, this first segment, we are going to do an either or of highly paid but underperforming players.
Okay.
So number one, we'll look to net.
All right.
Carey Price or Sergei Bobrovsky?
So questions like this, though, I need to know. What is the general makeup of the team? Because I don't feel like it's fair to be because I feel like my answer could be different if I'm Arizona compared to if I'm Colorado,
So it's we'll say it's pickup pond hockey. You're going to get one goalie, one defender, and one forward.
Oh man. Bob or Price? You know what? After seeing the video of him in pregame stick handling, I'm gonna go with Carey Price.
Yeah, I saw that video too. That was
because
sick.
I feel like even if he doesn't play in goal, I'd still very much have an incredibly useful teammate. So I'm gonna go with Carey Price for that reason. Multi-talented.
Okay. So neither of these two are necessarily underperforming, but these are two of the highest paid centers in the league. Do you go with Jonathan Toews or Anze Kopitar?
Kopitar.
Okay, so then finally...
Primary reason to say that...
Slovenia, number one.
We don't know what's going... Well, Slovenia, number one, of course. Second, we don't really know what's up with Jonathan Toews, right? In terms of whatever injury has gone on or whatever's gone on with him. And again, hopefully he's fine. Hopefully he's all right. None of our business to know what's going on. It's clear they don't want that news out there, so it's fine. Third, I've just always really liked Anze Kopitar. Just a great player, Slovenia number one. And, Jonathan Toews, I'm still recovering from 8 years ago when the man broke my heart. So let's go with Anze Kopitar.
Fair. All right, so highly paid, underperforming defenseman. Do you take PK Subban or Erik Karlsson?
Oh, man, so now I can't even go with the injuries because they've both had injuries. So see, that's tough though because they both had injuries. They both clearly, shout out to that guy if that picked up. They both clearly, have strong personalities. It's just PK has that really outgoing personality, and Erik Karlsson has that Scandinavian sense of humor, but also like the red mist of when I get mad, I'm going to go after you, which we saw in one of the more recent Sharks games. I'm going to go with PK. And that way, hopefully I could get him on our podcast.
It's like, here to discuss the Winter Olympics, specifically the skiing events, PK Subban.
Sorry, PK, is that a sore subject?
Oh, yeah, I forgot that. Yeah. So
they broke up. They broke up.
Well, this is real awkward, and he's probably not coming on now.
He's probably not coming on now.
It's like, here to talk about his new book, PK Subban's Dad.
Erik Karlsson, welcome to the show.
Okay. So, here's a fun question. So, as of last night, David Perron, St. Louis Blues, he has become their first point per game player in a very long time. Who is younger, me or David Perron?
Ooh, see, I thought you were going to go with like, who did he pass? And I saw that it was Pavel Demitra.
It was Pavel Demitra, yes.
Who's younger, you or David Perron? God, David Perron's been around for a while now, though. He was on Edmonton,
Anaheim. He was on Vegas.
Yeah, Jesus Christ! Yeah, remember when David Perron was on Vegas?
Remember when he was on the Blues originally?
I feel like it's a trick question. I feel like you're younger, but it's got to be like by a really small amount.
I'm younger by 5 months. Me and Perron are almost the same age. Isn't that crazy? I feel like Perron is the oldest guy in the league. It's the Anze Kopitar situation all over again.
Oh, God. I mean, it's one of those things, too, for me, where I'm just like, oh, you know, I look at certain players where I'm just like, I'm the same age as them. Like, for example, like, oh, Morgan Riley. But it's like, I still view Morgan Riley as like 21. Even though he's been around for a long time, like 22 or 23 at best, even though, you know, he is turning or has turned 27 already this year. So, yeah, that's one of those things. Shout out to Tom Wilson, by the way. Same age as Tom Wilson.
Yeah, he's a lot younger than you'd imagine.
Yeah. It's one of those weird things,
Perron,
right?
Only 32 years old.
Which in hockey sense, as you've learned by trying to skate on Florida ice, is up there.
I mean, does it count when you're basically water skiing? Florida ice. There's got to be some evil behind it. Okay, so the next question is very general. What is your favorite defunct or relocated NHL franchise?
Ooh, defunct or relocated franchise. I mean, the first one that come to mind is the Nordiques. You know, growing up with them still being around. I mean, obviously, I didn't really get to experience them, but it's like they were still a team when I was born. Same thing with the like OG Winnipeg Jets. It's not the Colorado Rockies, I'll tell you that much. For me, I guess it like the one I remember vividly, obviously, is Atlanta. That's the only one that I vividly remember. And I honestly, it is probably Atlanta. That said, I look back at the Whalers, and obviously the look, the jerseys. Like the only downside to the Whalers is that they played in Hartford. Shout out to Hartford. You know how bad it is. So I'd probably go with Atlanta. Just because, again, aside from that, there's not much. Aside from that, though, like I do like Hartford's look. And I do have to shout out the California Golden Seals, too, for their wonderful white skates. But, yeah, I mean, Atlanta's probably number one, but Hartford's definitely up there too. That's a tough one because there aren't actually that many defunct or relocated teams in NHL history compared to what one might think for a league that's almost 100 years old.
So mine is the Hartford Whalers, and it's because my favorite movie is Mallrats. Like, I watch Mallrats probably more than any other movie. And there's a scene where I always forget Jason Lee's character's name, but there's a scene where he's sitting there, he's playing whatever Chell was back then, like NHL 92 or whatever. And
Chell 92.
And he
experienced the fever.
He utters this line, and it just has stuck with me for so long that I just love Hartford so much for being a part of this. But he just says, "Breakfast come and go, Renee. Now Hartford, the whale, they only beat Vancouver once, maybe twice in a lifetime." So I don't know why, but that's just stuck with me for so long that I love the Whalers for being a part of that.
The whale.
The whale. It's so funny when he's like, Hartford, the whale. All right, so final question. Speaking of relocated teams, speaking of your new favorite team, this is a Colorado question in honor of them winning the President's Trophy. Which president? Not my president. The President's Cup Trophy. Colorado Avalanche. Pick one. Joe Sakic, Nathan McKinnon.
So the problem is we know what Joe Sakic is at his peak. Have we seen peak McKinnon yet?
I don't know. I don't follow him on social. Maybe posting some fire memes.
Maybe. I mean, I grew up loving Joe Sakic, and obviously it's because Ray Bourque ended up on those teams. So you look at Sakic, Forsberg, Foote, like, you know, Alex Tanguay, like those teams were incredible, and obviously Sakic was at the helm of that. I don't know. Again, the question, if I take it too literally, is like, well, what era are we in, and so on and so forth. I mean, McKinnon is. I'll go with McKinnon. You can't go wrong, one way or another. You can't go wrong.
Right on. Nathan McKinnon hasn't tweeted in 3 years and doesn't even have a check mark on Twitter. Really slacking on the social media game. All right, so that does it for Warmies. And you know, Tougie, in spite of everything we've been through, everything we've said on this podcast, we are still sponsored by Manscaped, our lovely sponsors. And they can, you can use code Tougie, that's TOUGIE, for 20% off at manscaped.com. Manscaped, the cutting edge, brand new, hot off the presses, straight from, I'm assuming, MIT, could have been developed anywhere. Technology and male grooming. That's right, Manscaped, your balls will thank you. Once again, code Tougie, TOUGIE, for 20% off your next purchase at manscaped.com. Keep it clean.
I don't think there's anything else left I can add to that. You nailed it, buddy. You nailed it.
Yeah, just like they nailed the Lawnmower 4.0.
Nailed it.
So now you've heard our warm-ups, you've heard our ads, you've heard our intro. I'm sure you have some questions.
Oh boy, don't they? So, Deej, we have a lot of different questions today. On top of that, again, we'll be mixing some in there throughout some of the conversations that we have. We will start things off, though, with yet another Hall of Fame related question. This comes in from one Lavari saying, Pekka Rinne, Hall of Fame or nah? I think this is in the aftermath of me mentioning Pekka Rinne probably playing his last game for the Preds in the regular season. And Deej, the answer here is quite simple. Nah. We've talked about it. You have to have an unbelievable resume to even get into the conversation of making the Hockey Hall of Fame as a goaltender. Pekka Rinne is not there. At the end of the day, a lack of hardware is certainly held against him. he'd have a little bit of a better chance if they won the cup a few years ago. But yeah, no, Pekka Rinne goes into the Hall of Good, if not the Hall of Very Good. But again, like you look, I think, God, what have we mentioned? There's like 5 goalies that have been in the Hall of Fame, inducted in the Hall of Fame in like the last 20 years or something like that. It might even be less. And it's your Brodeurs.
Actually, if you even go further, if you go through the last 30 years, it is only 6 goaltenders have been put in the Hall of Fame. And forgive me for not knowing some of the depths of hockey history, but in 2016, I can't even pronounce this guy's name. But Rogi Vachon, I'm going to assume is how it's pronounced, was added to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I have no idea who that is. I just heard of him today. It is so difficult. So there's 5 goalies that DeJ has heard of since 1989. So that's 32 years that have made the Hall of Fame. And that's Grant Fuhr, Billy Smith, Patrick Waugh, Ed Belfour, and Dominic Hasek. Like, there is an insane bar to get into the Hall for goalies. And they're like, it's a significantly higher bar for goalies than it is for skaters.
Oh, it's absurdly more difficult. And unless that changes, someone like Rinne doesn't make it. And call it a hunch, I don't think that's going to change, right? I think that standard is going to stay incredibly high, as honestly, I think it should. I mean, you're talking about a Hall of Fame at the end of the day, and you probably don't want to. I'm not going to say Pekka Rinne would water it down, but by the standard that they've thrown out there already, he's not to that same level, nor is Ryan Miller and some of the other goalies that we've discussed here as of late. So, unfortunately, there are a lot of really good goaltenders who weren't, Hall of Fame caliber that just aren't going to make it.
Yeah, I think we see Luongo in the next 10 years.
Yes.
And that might be it. Obviously, eventually, I think they'll add Fleury, but
even then, I don't know if Luongo's a guarantee. I don't know if he is.
I certainly don't think he's a first ballot guy.
By how restrictive they are when it comes to who makes it, I could honestly see Luongo falling short simply due to not having a Stanley Cup. And I'm not saying that's right, but I could see a situation where Luongo doesn't make it. And that's, despite the fact that, obviously he was just passed by Fleury, but you're talking someone who's 4th all time in wins. I don't know if he makes it. And looking at, and here we'll look at the Hockey Hall of Fame really quickly, because obviously, like we talked about this, Marc-Andre Fleury is a future Hall of Famer. That is a guarantee. No doubt in my mind. He has the cups. He's third
so much
all-time
better
wins.
than we realize right now.
Yeah, he went underappreciated for a little bit, I would say, because of the fact that, again, Pittsburgh, he got jumped by Matt Murray, stuff like that. Now, Ed Belfour made it. Ed Belfour made it. He's 5th all-time in wins. Luongo finished with more wins than Belfour. Ed Belfour has that Stanley Cup in '99. Sorry for bringing that up, Sabres fans. So, we'll see. Again, I think Luongo should be a Hall of Famer. I'm just saying I think there's an argument there. And then you look at who's 6th all-time in wins for goalie. It's Henrik Lundqvist. Is Henrik Lundqvist going to make it into the Hall of Fame? I don't know. He doesn't have... Obviously, he has the individual hardware as a Vezina winner. Again, 6th all-time in wins. Does he make the Hockey Hall of Fame without a Stanley Cup on his resume? There's that debate and that doubt that he would. Again, not saying that's right, not saying that I think that should hold Henrik Lundqvist out of the Hall of Fame, but based off, like Deej mentioned, 6 goalies in 30 years, there's a very good chance that he doesn't make it either. Curtis Joseph.
The Generals are due.
The Generals
are due.
Like, Curtis Joseph is 7th all-time in wins.
I think Luongo makes it off politics alone.
That's fair.
I think Luongo's so damn likable that he makes it.
Yeah. Cujo's 7th all-time in wins. He doesn't have a cup. He's not in the Hall of Fame. Terry Sawchuk is 8th all-time in wins. Obviously, Jacques Plant's there as well. I believe, Tony Esposito's there. But then you get, that's back there. So there's a legitimate argument over whether or not Luongo and Lundqvist will make it. Whereas with Marc-Andre Fleury, I think that's a guarantee. So if we're talking about Lundqvist and Luongo,
the Cujo argument is interesting.
Yeah, if we're talking Lundqvist and Luongo not being in the Hall of Fame, clearly there's a difference between those two and Pekka Rinne. There just is. So I think that kind of just speaks volumes to the difficulty of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the whole time that Pekka Rinne has been in the league, he's been a top 5 goalie. But if you look at any of the other names on this list, they were the best goalie in the league when they were in. And so I just, don't get me wrong, I love Pekka Rinne. He's one of my favorite goalies. He single-handedly broke Xbox controllers that were playing against me in Hut for years. But I think it's too strict for goalies to get into the Hall.
I do agree. We will move on. This is from one Zach R. What is your ideal Stanley Cup final matchup now that the first rounds are set? At least I think he meant Stanley Cup. He just said Stanley Cup matchup. I imagine that means the final. And I will say this. Of course, Deej talked about it in the last episode. We have our bracket challenge. You'll be able to find the link there on Twitter as well. Made a video on YouTube where I go through filling out my bracket, so make sure to check that out. My ideal Stanley Cup final matchup, Boston and Toronto. It is possible. Bruins and Leafs for the Stanley Cup. Who says no? I don't see how anybody could say no to that.
I'm going to go with Panthers Habs. Panthers win. Montreal has to relocate to Orlando.
Oh, I'm good with that.
Real answer though, it's too difficult for me to distance myself from the Panthers. So I'm gonna say, so like if I can pretend the Panthers don't exist for a minute, like most of you do, I would say absolute 100% the best Stanley Cup final that we can get as hockey fans this year. Pittsburgh, Edmonton, McDavid versus Crosby. Who still holds the torch?
Ooh. I'm on board with that too, to be honest. You know, it's funny though, in the bracket, I'm like, we could see like Crosby versus McKinnon at some point as well. But no, that's even more spicy. The idea of McDavid versus Crosby.
Who's the king of Nova Scotia?
God. See, the thing is, like, obviously, I don't think we're going to keep this format, and we're not, especially with Seattle coming into the league. But this format of these divisions working this way, independent of a conference, so that the Final Four can be any weird combination, is fascinating to me. Like, I get the idea of tradition, and the Stanley Cup final is, the best of the East against the best of the West. Like, obviously, I like that. But the fact that we could see, so many different kind of combinations here is, like I said, just fascinating to me. So I'm excited. Obviously, Edmonton-Pittsburgh would be a traditional East versus West, but there's a lot of good potential matchups now that I look at it. And I talked about this in the last episode too. I am so damn excited for the playoffs. There are so many interesting matchups even in round number 1. We'll move on. And this is an interesting one, Deej, that we might have to put a little bit more thought into, but I'm okay with it. This comes from Derek. If the NHL were to reset the teams and do a fantasy draft next season, who would the first 10 picks be? So I think we can work together on this. I don't think we need to go
they'd
for
be hockey
any
players, right?
Yeah. I don't think we need to go for any.
Thanks for the question, Derek. I was
like, there we go. It's done. I know it's a little bit more of an in-depth question than what we normally ask, or what we normally answer. But like I said, I'm fascinated by this one because there is some room for debate right now. Obviously, in terms, and we'll start off with forwards, right? Let's start off with forwards. I feel like that's the easiest one to kind of knock out there. Connor McDavid is going top 10. Is Leon Draisaitl going top 10?
He's going number 1. Yes.
I feel like Leon
No
Draisaitl
question.
goes. Obviously, Austin Matthews is in that top 10. But then the question is, do you look like for goaltenders, right? For goalies here, I guess to move on to that, are there any goalies taken in the top 10? Based off of the value of goaltending.
It depends who's doing the drafting, I guess.
Like, does Andrei Vasilevsky go top 10 over some of the young stars that we have on forward and defense right now in a fantasy draft scenario? Because I feel like if any goalie were to be taken in the top 10, it's him. So if Vasi does anybody else?
So I'm a firm believer,
because I don't know.
I don't know. So I believe goaltenders don't reach their peak until age 28. That is my personal ethos. So I think, obviously in a draft like this, age is going to come in to the equation. So I think Vasilevsky is absolutely, at 26 years old, he's 100% a top 10 pick. Mm-hmm. I think in that vein, somebody like Philip Grubauer should be, but he won't be. I don't know. I think there's only 2 or 3.
Carter Hart might have been had this season not been as brutal for him as it was.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he's a top 10 pick currently.
So I think the only goalie that could even be in the conversation right now is Vasi.
Yeah, you get like Vasi. I mean, Chris Driedger just turned 26, but I don't think he doesn't have enough of the sustained success. But you know who else is only 26 years old that I think would work his way into a top 10 pick is UC Saros.
I mean, statistically deserving, yes. But then you get into that conversation, right? Where we mentioned 3 forwards. We have McDavid, we have Draisaitl, we have Matthews, we have Vasilevsky. Defensively, is someone like Adam Fox in that conversation? He should be, but is he appreciated enough? Would it not be probably someone like Victor Hedman who gets in there, even though there's been injury concerns with Hedman, and he's, God, how old is Victor Hedman at this point? He's closing in on 30, if not.
He's 30.
Already. He is 30 years old on the dot. It's like you're trying to play the guessing game of how NHL GMs would set this up. I guess all we can really do is answer it from our perspective. So for me, I mean, defensively, you're talking about Fox, you're talking about Makar, Hamilton, Theodore, Chychrun. I don't think Quinn Hughes is in a top 10 conversation at this stage. And even then, like Charlie McAvoy is probably not in a top 10 conversation. I mean, outside of, I don't think Chychrun makes a top 10. I don't think Theodore makes a top 10. Hamilton, like the only defenseman that.
What about Dougie Hamilton?
I don't know. I don't know if Dougie makes it. I love Dougie, but top 10, okay. I don't know if he makes it. Especially fantasy draft. So you presume, we're playing for the future here. Like, would you go for Dougie Hamilton over Cale Makar? I don't think the majority of people would. Would you go for Dougie Hamilton over Adam Fox after the season that he's had? I don't know if you would, if you're talking like long-term building a franchise right now. I think the only 2 guarantees for the top 10 defensively would be Fox and Makar at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, even Rasmus Dahlin, who's only 21 right now, which is crazy to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think he'd get into that top 10 conversation.
I think you're right. I think there's such a gap in terms of skill after the top 8, 9 forwards that it has to be forward concentrated.
So let's just say we have Vasilevsky, McDavid, Matthews, Draisaitl. We'll go with both Fox and Makar. McKinnon. Like, who are the other forwards? Like, your Marners, McKinnon. McKinnon's top 10. Then you can debate Crosby and Ovi long-term for top 10. Panarin's got to be top 10. Is Kirill Kaprizov top 10 after the season that he had? Very well could be. And then you get into, is Mitch Marner in that conversation? Is Brad Marchand in that conversation? Brad Marchand. Look at Brad Marchand's stat line, people. Kucherov. Yeah, is Kucherov in there? So obviously, I think we've thrown out quite a few different names there. It would certainly come down to the circumstances of the situation. In a real life in a real life setting, how would you look at players' ages, injury history, and stuff like that? But I think for the most part, we could say it would be very, very forward heavy, which is the trend of the league right now anyway, in terms of the star power. So I think we can leave it at that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe something to revisit someday. This one comes from one broken wheelchair. Which playoff team makes significant changes if they don't make it to the Final Four? So looking then at the playoff teams, right? Let's look at ye old.
That's a really good
teams.
Question.
It
for
is.
Once. Thanks, Twitter. No, I was like, no, all your questions are actually solid. I needed to roast them. That's actually, I actually have to do some thinking here because that's really good because I haven't really looked at the teams and evaluated them under playoff pressure. And I hate to say this because it seems like I shit on them every single week, but I feel like the Leafs they have to be a Final Four team. Like if they don't make it out of the North this year, what excuse are you going to give other than, we just can't, McDavid's too good.
So let's go by division here, and we will. I guess we'll start with the North because you brought it up. There is a lot of pressure on Toronto. I feel as though, in terms of major change, though, for them, what's more likely? Do you fire Kyle Dubas? Do you fire Sheldon Keefe? Or is that okay, we're trading Nylander just to do something? I think if Toronto makes it out of the first round, they're safe from those major changes. If I don't know if they make drastic changes if they don't make it beyond the second round. I think it's just I know a lot of Leafs fans are saying, okay, the first round hurdle isn't enough. But the problem is I just don't see, I guess, what moves you make because you've improved the defense. So what is it? If you what coach would help? What GM would help? I don't really see. I don't really see what that would change. And if you were to get rid of a William Nylander and redistribute some of that salary towards your bottom six, I guess, how much is that going to help to have, a couple extra $1 million there? I mean, I guess the argument's another top 4 defenseman, which, I mean, I look at that defense, and obviously Riley, Brody, Muzzin is solid. Would you be better if Justin Hall was on your third pair instead of in your top 4? Maybe, but Justin Hall's also been very solid this year. Better than expected. So I don't really know if the Leafs, for example, would be that team to just be like, oh, well, we blew it up, even though they have all that pressure on them. Edmonton, I mean, they're not firing Ken Holland. So is a head coach change drastic if they don't make the second round? I think that's about as drastic as it were to be. I don't know what other changes you would make. You're obviously not going to get rid of your key players at this stage. Winnipeg, I'd say changes could be due. Obviously, Cheveldayoff's been the GM for a decade. You've had Paul Maurice there for just as long. I think Winnipeg is perhaps even more likely to see those changes, even though I don't think really anybody is expecting them to make it past Edmonton. So, again, likely to make changes, but when the expectations, I think, are rather low, at least externally. Internally, the expectations might be there. Oh, yeah, we can do this. We can go on a run. But then you look at, how they limped into the playoffs, and it's is that really going to happen? And then you get to Montreal, which, I mean, I think Montreal could have the same drastic changes too. I mean, is it out of the realm of possibility to say that head coach or GM they move on from? No, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all. In terms of major trades, what can they really do? Like, who would they even look to get rid of? Like, your odds are not moving on from that Carey Price deal unless you pay Seattle a crap load of assets to get rid of them. So, I mean, I could see some head coaches and GM changes there in the North. Beach, I mean, along the same lines, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I don't think we see anything in the Central. I mean, theoretically, if Colorado gets bounced by St. Louis, maybe they try and shake something up. But even then, I don't think that's that big of a deal. In the East, I don't really see them. I don't really see any of the 4 teams in the East changing anything. And then in the Central, I mean, I certainly don't see anybody in the Central changing a coach regardless. But I know. Let me think about the East again real quick, just to make sure.
Like Pittsburgh, I don't see it. I mean, especially too because Rutherford just left. And again, like, you're not going to move on from Malkin or Crosby or anything like that. Even though Malkin's had injuries, like, I guess there were the rumors of potentially moving on from Letang. But if you're Pittsburgh and you don't make it to the Final Four here, do you view that as like, well, our window's slammed shut? You didn't view getting swept by the Islanders in 2019 as your window slamming shut. So 2 years on, you lose to them again. Do you view that as this catastrophic failure and it's time to move on? I mean, we did joke that the Penguins were going to win the Connor Bedard lottery, so maybe it lines up. But I think basically for the majority of teams, what we're seeing here is, I think it comes down to mainly that North Division where you could see that shuffling of the deck. You know, I like even Nashville in the Central, I think for the most part, like David Poile seems to be like safe. He's got that job for life if he wants it. I don't really see them making a head coaching change either because I think they view it as like, we fought so hard to get into the playoffs. That's a victory in and of itself. So I think you just pretty much have to look at the North Division to say, here's where those potential changes could come from.
Yeah, I agree.
We will move on. This one's from AJ, an extended viewer question segment today, I guess. Does McDavid have it in him to hit Lemieux's 1996 number of 161 points or higher in his career? Ruling out Gretzky because of his ludicrous production levels that'll never be touched. So, Deej, do you think McDavid can break 160 points in a season in his career? Knowing how drastically different the NHL is, can he do it? He hit 104 points in 55 games. Can he do it? Can he hit that absolutely absurd number? He was on a 155 point pace this year. It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. That said, did he hit that that ludicrous point pace because he was beating up on some bad Canadian teams this year more often than he normally would have?
Ooh. So I've seen the argument that nobody in that division plays defense. So
we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that.
I think Edmonton. In terms of their team structure, I mean, we'll say you've probably got 8 more years of Connor McDavid at his peak, at least. During that time, every single contract on that team will be up and switched out at some point or another. And I think you will be able to build a team around Connor McDavid, who has only gotten better year after year and has still gotten better. I think he will be fine. I think he will hit a 2 points per game average at some point. So I'm going to go as far as say 164. I think he will get there.
I can't doubt Connor McDavid at this stage. Can you? Like, I mean, every time it's like, how much better can this guy get? He has statistically gotten better every single year so far in his career. I refuse to doubt him. I think he can do it. as mentioned, Gretzky's untouchable. No one's ever hitting 200 points in a season again. I just don't see it. The game has evolved too much. But yeah, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to say that McDavid could hit a 2 points per game pace. We will move on here. Kind of love the traffic. We will move on. This comes from John. What is your favorite piece of hockey literature in terms of books? Now, Deej, I'm going to let you go first here. Do you have an answer to this?
Yeah, I have a little book I picked up when I first really got into hockey, like hardcore, when I paid attention to like what general managers were doing and things like that, and I actually cared about drafts and stuff. I have a little book I picked up called The Art of Scouting that is still very popular to this day, where basically they explain what NHL scouts look for. And it is a fascinating book. And I just happened to be sitting in my car listening to like Sirius XM NHL radio when they pushed this book. And it gave me an insight into hockey that I think very few Floridians come across. And I've never done it, but every single time it's like one of my hockey friends' birthday or whatever, I'm like, oh, I'll just get him The Art of Scouting. And then I don't. I'm like, hey, here's a 12er of Truly. Go to town. So I would recommend that to anybody. It is a phenomenal book. And I'm a nerd. Like, I'm a software engineer. Like, I don't think I'm cool for a second. There's a certain way I like to look at things. And it's a very analytical, built up. How do I observe this correctly? Like, my favorite genre of music is jazz, right? And there's a very structural way of looking at hockey that comes from this book. And I love it.
So I am very, very far behind in my personal life in terms of reading.
Yeah, Tougie can't read.
I can't. It's
like, you see the poster on his wall? It's just one letter. He's still working on it. It's a B. It's a B.
B.
No,
I got that one.
I don't know. I'm sure you've read some hockey books. Like, he grew up in the Northeast. Like, even kids books. I'm sure. Like, because when I grew up, there was no. We didn't have a boy at the Leafs camp in the local library.
Like, there's just nothing I can remember from that time that I read. But obviously, like, there's a lot of stuff now that I keep meaning to go back and read. Not just hockey-wise, but other books as well. Obviously, as a big wrestling fan, there have been books that I've wanted to read for a long time, too. Like, I am very big on, biographies and autobiographies. I will say there's a lot of books that Ken Reed has put out. Ken Reed of Sportsnet that I'm very interested in. That I keep meaning to get around to read. Always meant to read Wayne Gretzky's book. That, again, just never got around to. 99 Stories of the Game. There's just a lot out there. But yeah, I haven't, just because of how I guess just because of what my schedule is like in terms of, and I always say the word sarcastically, but the term, the grind, for Twitch, for YouTube, getting into the esports commentary stuff. Like, I've just been so focused on that, on top of a lot of my entertainment coming from, YouTube in my spare time. It's just, I often haven't really found myself with a lot of free time to just sit down and read. And it's something I regret, and that I am going to try to change here in the near future. So I don't really have, I don't really have an answer there, unfortunately. So, I'll get back to you on that one. And Deej, our final question, although we'll sprinkle some more in there throughout some of these talking points as we move on. This comes from friend of the show, Smoot, and that guy who just drove by. What do the Ducks need to do to fix it? And the answer is nothing. Stay the course. Trust the process. The Ducks will be fine in due time. They have a young core, a good crop of talent. They're going to be fine. And oftentimes, that is the answer to everyone's concerns. Just give it time, and it'll work itself out.
You think, like, even their coaching, you think is fine? Like, you wouldn't change that?
I mean, I don't think it's the biggest thing right now. Like, I don't know if, long term, that's probably not the best answer, right? But at the end of the day, for a team that's still a couple years away, I think, from even getting back into playoff contention, like, I could say fix the coaching, but is that the number one thing right now? No. I mean, sure, I kind of just, I think that's a gimme that they'll end up with a different coach by the time they're ready to compete again.
I mean, Emilio Estevez is only 59 years old.
John Tortorella is like 63, and he doesn't plan on retiring, so Emilio is very much available.
Yeah, they should bring Emilio on, and he'll save the Ducks. We've seen it before. It's a proven formula. So with that, we'll thank you very much, of course, for sending your questions in. As always, I put up a tweet, twitter.com/Tougie24. It's on your screen, of course, if you're watching in video form, where, I always ask you guys for questions. And, of course, the Discord as well, which, again, in the description of every YouTube video, you can find a link to said Discord in the podcast questions section. And I'll always ask you guys before every show for your questions. Deej, with that, in terms of our general hockey talk / division breakdown, obviously we kind of recapped everything that we can recap as far as like the end of the season. And I guess in lieu of getting into what could each team have done differently, I mean, again, like I said, we kind of summed that up, right? Like, Vancouver, disaster of a season. So instead, we just have a bunch of random different talking points here that I think we can just kind of go over. And starting here with this, I mean, there's not too much to it, but obviously the playoffs start tomorrow, but the regular season doesn't end until Wednesday because of COVID in Canada. And it's bizarre. Absolutely bizarre that, I mean, obviously first time ever that this is going to happen. Like tomorrow night, Boston and Washington start, but Vancouver and Edmonton are still playing a regular season game, and the North Division playoffs do not begin until Wednesday, May 19th. Just very, very weird. And shout out to the Habs and Leafs, who are going to be playing each other in the playoffs for the first time since 1979. But it's been obviously a very interesting, and we'll call it historical for some good reasons and of course some bad reasons, but I'm just excited for this. But how happy do you think the Canucks are themselves, where they're just like, oh, thank God, no one's going to be watching us anyway, we don't have to try all that hard? Yeah, it's like, hey, Canucks fans, I've got news for you. You're going to be playing in May next year. It's not.
Oh, really? That's awesome. LOL.
Yeah, I think.
Just you wait.
Like, I knew it. Deaky Pete, he's going to win the Art Ross.
I just want hockey in May as the monkey paw curls. Be
Indeed.
careful what you wish for, Canucks fans.
Yeah, in what is likely to be the lowest rated game in NHL history, I believe the Flames and Canucks are playing each other on the 19th as the final game of the season. In what can be called the just get it over with already bowl. If you're a Vancouver fan, you're glad to see this season's over. Like, I mean, don't be sad because it happened. Just be glad that it's over.
As well as that, before we get into...
Sorry, sometimes I get myself. That's great.
On top of that, before we get into one of the more in-depth conversations we can have, wanted to mention this. Another NHL player mentioning the toll that COVID has taken on them physically. That's right. Tougie's still beating this drum, and we're not going to stop. Amanda Stein mentioned this. After being placed on COVID protocol on January 20th, Mckenzie Blackwood says he only noticed his breathing being back to normal 3 weeks ago. That is a top athlete in the world having effects, bare minimum, from COVID for 3 months. As well, this is from Scott Wheeler. Marco Rossi is finally being given the green light to resume training and skating. Again, an 18, 19-year-old that had his entire rookie season taken away from him due to this. There is light at the end of the tunnel. I know to our Canadian contingent, things are still a little bit rocky up there. It's going a little bit better in the States. And obviously for DeJ being in Florida, a state that has never taken anything seriously in its life. And screw you, nightclubs never die.
We have herd immunity now.
Is that official?
We're good. We're good down here now. You can't ever really know. It's Florida. It's just every day you wake up and there's not an alligator in your pool, you thank the good Lord. I did want to address Mckenzie Blackwood, though, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I do want to address Mckenzie Blackwood. So Mckenzie Blackwood was on my fantasy team this year. So if you are a Devils fan or you had Mckenzie Blackwood on your fantasy hockey team this year, you probably noticed that up until January 20th of this year, Mckenzie Blackwood was a world beater. He was a top 5 goalie in the NHL. No questions asked. He looked amazing. And then we came back from COVID. He sucked. He did not have it together. And I think it's very obvious. By the time he actually did have it together, there was nothing left for the Devils to play for. And so it's just very unfortunate to see this happen to Blackwood in what very likely looked like it was going to be his breakout season.
Yeah. I mean, pretty straightforward. Again, not too much else to mention there. Just wanted to quickly bring it up because, again.
Yeah, it's still real. There's still real. It's interesting to me. And it's easy to forget. I'm fully vaccinated. I'm out playing beer league hockey. I went to Walmart on a whim the other day. I very much have my old life back. All my friends have the vaccine. I can go. I can see my friends. We can hang out and watch sports together. And it's not like that in so many places. And so it's very important, I think, to be reminded that there are very real consequences here. And that not everywhere is as safe as you might be if you are back on track. So it's important to reflect on what other people are going through because of the same thing you went through.
Exactly. So with that as well, again, mentioned a lot of different just kind of quick hit topics, and we'll see what kind of discussion comes out of it. DeJ, in the last show, we talked about the Buffalo Sabres and what was going on with Jack Eichel. And mentioning, of course, that the Sabres were originally framed in a pretty bad light by one Jack Eichel, but we've had some news come out since. Now, first and foremost, this specific comment, actually here, I'll move this specific comment a little bit later on because I feel like it goes hand in hand with another part of this, but this was mentioned as well. There's the Buffalo GM Kevin Adams making a statement on Jack Eichel saying the Sabres want Eichel to be healthy, had no problem with a second opinion, and that there was constant communication. Said the doctors agreed on a conservative rehab approach. Now, for those who do not know, this is what went down. The Sabres doctors essentially checked out Jack Eichel, said, hey, we don't need surgery here for this injury. Of course, Jack Eichel, well known, was injured before the season, played and then sat out. Of course, again, Ralph Krueger saying, I don't know about any injury. Kevin Adams backed his team doctors. From there, though, Adams confirmed that Jack Eichel and his representatives have considered a different option, a more experimental option in terms of cervical disc replacement. But the team's not comfortable with it because there's not a history of NHL players coming back from it. Now, for those who don't know, cervical spine is essentially your C1 through C7 vertebrae in the neck and their components. So the idea was essentially for the surgery is that Eichel would get one of those discs removed and have it replaced with an artificial disc. It's not a surgery that's recommended if the pain is limited to the neck only, as it's most likely the result of inflammation or compression that can be solved through non-invasive means. It was mentioned as well in this post, any surgeon worth their salt will always seek out conservative care before recommending an invasive option. So, Buffalo Brass were worried because according to them, there isn't any data for an NHLer returning to play after this type of surgery. That said, for Eichel, obviously you can, kind of read into this where it's him wanting to do what he thinks is best for him. And then obviously you get into the debate of, well, team doctors aren't exactly specialists on the spine and on the neck. So you can really see the divide between these two. Now, from the Sabres' perspective, DeJ, I agree with the thought of wanting to essentially try to rehab this to make it, more of a tolerable situation. But from Eichel's situation, he's the one dealing with the pain. He's the one dealing with the discomfort. He's the one who wants to do what's best for him. It's a tough spot to be in whenever you're talking about the neck, right? Because we talk about Connor McDavid. And hey, remember how Connor McDavid had a leg injury? And we all thought, oh my God, like he just blew out his knee. It's going to require surgery. Will he ever be the same if he has this surgery? What's going to happen with Connor McDavid? And then instead, he had that really intensive rehab process and no ill effects from the looks of it if you have watched Connor McDavid this season. So I get from the Sabres perspective, but obviously, again, drastic difference between a knee and the neck. But as was essentially mentioned in that piece, you're always going to look to postpone surgery. And it's why so many hockey players put off having surgery because, Deej, you know this, I know this. From, I guess, medical experience, like once you have surgery, really once an injury happens, you're never the same. But especially once you have surgery, you're never quite the same. And you'll always look to have that be your last resort with something like this. I did the same thing. Like I essentially blew out my knee, ACL, MCL, meniscus, just gone through a couple of different injuries. You try to rehab it, another injury happens, and I'm like, I have no choice. Like I'm sitting here, and again, I'm not, top of my game NHL player. I'm just sitting here, playing, sports in high school and after school with friends. And I'm just trying to walk down the hallway in school and my knee's clicking and I'm hobbling and falling half the time. It's like, yeah, I need this surgery. Obviously, for Jack Eichel to say, I'd really like to go this direction, it shows how bad the injury is, how much pain he's in. So it's a really interesting divide where obviously, Deej, you can see both sides to this argument, but also what else it leads into in terms of just how divided these two are. But first and foremost, I guess your thoughts on what I just mentioned.
It's a very complicated issue, right? I brought this up before. I'm incredibly health conscious. Like I'm type 1 diabetic. Like anything goes wrong. So much of my life is self-care and treatment that like they always tell you never to Google anything when it's wrong with you. But that's like 95% of my life is like Googling it, seeing like how this is affected diabetically, researching it. So I understand how Jack Eichel came to this conclusion. So that's another issue I have here, right? Is all of my evidence is anecdotal. I mean, even if you look up these, whatever they call them, the anterior cervical disc replacements, like this, what Jack Eichel wants, I don't think has ever been performed on a professional athlete. It's almost always, instead of replacing the disc, they remove the bad disc and fuse the other two together. Mario Lemieux had a similar surgery and he went on to play 10 years afterwards. I mean, obviously, when you hear that Jack Eichel wants the surgery, like clearly he's been sold on it somewhere, right? Like for me personally, there's a very common injury in hockey and in baseball. Not so much in football for some reason, but unless quarterbacks. But so I have a slap tear, a labral tear in my right shoulder. I tore it when I was 20 years old, and it was debilitating. I should have immediately gone and got surgery. However, what happened was 6 to 7 years later after that, when I was 26, 27, I got really into weightlifting and working out. And I put on probably 25 pounds of muscle in a year and a half. And since then, I have never been in shoulder pain. I've been completely fine. I rehabbed it correctly. Without necessarily knowing it. I mean, I was looking up videos on how to work out with a labral tear and how to strengthen it. So when you have somebody that is an athlete at the top of their game, this person is in shape. They have all the best doctors available to them, and you're in so much pain and everyone's just telling you to rehab it. There's only so much more strength you can gain when you are an athlete at the top of your level. It's not like you are going from a guy on the couch. So obviously Jack Eichel is not in bad shape. And so there's only so much more muscle he can gain. So obviously, I mean, it's so complicated that I think for me, what this says is not necessarily that Jack Eichel's stubborn about this or that he's completely dead set on getting the disc replaced as opposed to rehabbed or fused. I think the underlying issue here, and I think you'll agree with me on this, is for whatever reason, Jack Eichel does not trust the Buffalo medical staff. And why would he?
Yeah. And that kind of lends itself towards the rest of this discussion. Now, you talk about the thought of the divide between Eichel and the Sabres from just the on-ice perspective of, well, here's why there's all these rumors about Jack Eichel leaving. But now you add this. And as well, you have this comment. Lance Lozowski posted this on Twitter. I found it interesting to hear Sabres GM Kevin Adams say the organization had the talent to win. The missing piece, according to Adams, buying into something bigger than themselves, which is critical for team success. That's the magic, he added. Does that not read as calling out Jack Eichel as a leader and calling out the locker room saying, you guys aren't fully buying into what we're doing here? How do you read that?
So this is my take on this, and I think you'll find this interesting. I don't think people buy into anything. This is just a generalization of psychology. I don't think people buy into anything bigger than themselves. I believe they are sold on it. I don't think you can show somebody like a piece of shit car and be like, hey, it's gonna win the race. You've just got to believe. You've got to show your work. And Buffalo is not showing their work to any of these players. Like, you can't tell me that everybody but Jack Eichel bought in. Like, you heard Rasmus Dahlin talk. You've heard Rasmus Ristolainen talk. Every single player on that team has not bought in because, I mean, I don't know if it's sold. Yeah, I don't know if it's the coaching. I don't know if it's the Pagulas. I don't know if it's the ownership. There was a time when players bought in Buffalo. Like, you remember the black, red, and white jerseys. That was a good-ass hockey team. Like, obviously, there were no cups or anything in that time period. There was playoff success. There were extremely good players. None of these players have been sold on anything. And I think that is the issue. You can't just call out the leader and tell him to lead everyone blindly when there's the supposition that Jack Eichel doesn't want to play. You don't grab the skill set, especially, and I mean, like, I hate to insert a bias here, but as an American, you don't grab that level of skill set in hockey without dedicating your entire life to it. Like, and I'm not saying it's necessarily easier for Canadians. Well, I'd say it's a little bit easier for a Canadian to develop that skill set, not by much. But as an American, I think you have to throw yourself that much harder into it because it's not as big of a cultural thing, if that makes sense. So you can't say that Jack Eichel isn't dedicated or doesn't want to be part of a team when all he's done his entire life is dedicate himself to the sport and be part of a team. Like, you've got to sell him on it, Buffalo.
And I'll say this too. I think that conversation of nobody buys in, they have to be sold. I think it can be a combination at best. And I'll bring up the St. Louis Blues of 2019.
Okay.
That team bought in. I think, though, because they were sold on the idea of, hey, from management of, we're bringing in Craig Berube, we're bringing in the guy. I think that was a combination of the team being sold that, hey, look, you're not out of it. And I think they bought in to say, yeah, you're right, we're not out of it. We're better than this. For Buffalo, though, there isn't any little bit from management to say, yeah, no, you're right, we do have a chance here. We're going to buy into this. Like, there's none of that. Absolutely nothing. And then you get into the next part of this. And I said, I'm pretty sure on this podcast, not all that long ago, that I thought Jack Eichel was going to be a Sabre next year. I think we had that conversation of who, Jack Eichel, someone else, who's more likely to get dealt. I think I may have already changed my opinion. And this comes from Sabres beat writer John Vogel. Buffalo will need a new captain. The bridge between Eichel and the Sabres is engulfed in flames, and it's hard to imagine it'll be salvaged. Eichel has been a fitness freak since his teen years, and he's furious the team is telling him what he can and can't do with his body. The trust is shattered, and that's just one angle. Add in 6 seasons without a sniff of the playoffs, and Eichel is clearly ready to move on. He is as good as gone. Now that we've learned more about this injury side of things, I can't help but believe John Vogel and what he's heard. I think we are very much now at this stage looking at a Jack Eichel moving on from the Buffalo Sabres. How he goes about that, I don't know. But Deej, after seeing that, like, I imagine you agree. Like, it just seems like a matter of time now at this stage.
Yeah, I agree. And when we look at him leaving, obviously, and it's really interesting because this parallels the Aaron Rodgers situation right now, right? In a weird way, where it's you look at the player, one of the best in the world, who can afford this player? And who can afford this player that needs this player? I mean, of course, everybody comes up with the Rangers, but like, what do you even get for Jack Eichel? I think he's done. I don't think he comes back to Buffalo. I wouldn't at this point. It's if they're even talking about trading you, we are hearing 2 weeks ago's news. Like, I'm sure they are in the middle of a trade right now.
Yeah.
I'm sure this is happening. Otherwise, it would have been squashed the 2-3 other times it came up.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the fact that the Aaron Rodgers thing hasn't been squashed, I think we're going to see him in a different jersey next year. So if he goes... So I look at the Taylor Hall trade. I look at the fact that Kevin Adams wasn't able to get Taylor Hall's full worth, because he's not negotiating from a position of power, just as he won't be in this Jack Eichel trade because there's only a limited number of teams that can give you something even close to his worth.
Right.
I think you're going to get a first. I think you are going to get a good, but not excellent roster player. And I think you're going to get a prospect. And I think that's all you get for Jack Eichel, which is sad, but that's what's going to happen.
So, and this was asked as well. I mean, I guess just the general question of where does he go? And Steve also asked, what does an Eichel trade package to the Rangers look like? Now, I'll talk about the Rangers first. This is the time for the Rangers to put up or shut up. And we'll jump ahead to one of the other talking points here as well. The Rangers, on top of letting go of everyone else they've let go of, have dismissed head coach David Quinn, as well as an assistant. As well, Brian Leach has resigned from his hockey ops advisory position, and they also re-signed Ryan Lindgren to a 3-year deal worth $3 million per, which is a good deal. So they have fully cleaned house. And the official story from the Rangers is they have cleaned house because they had higher expectations this year, which again, I think is garbage. I think is misguided. I don't think at any point the New York Rangers were a playoff team this year. Yes, we had those debates over, well, if Panarin was there, maybe. But on paper, I do not think the Rangers' goal should have been, we have to make the playoffs or bust. I think it was a Toronto situation from like 5 years ago where it's, hey, if we make the playoffs, that's pretty cool. That's a bonus. It's not, you have to bare minimum make the playoffs. That is completely misguided. That said, the word is from the Rangers, there's no fishiness about what happened in the Wilson game or nothing. The word is our expectation was playoffs. It is now time to put up or shut up. You have to make this Jack Eichel trade now. You have to. Because you're going for it, right? So now is the time. What other move can you possibly make than to make the move that everyone's linking you with this Jack Eichel trade? You have all 3 of your first round picks for the next few years. You have the prospects to be able to give up. Let's see it. Put up or shut up. You said, here we are. Well, then let's see it. In terms of the picks, they are there. In terms of the prospects, they are there. If the Sabres want a center, you give up Filip Chytil. You give up Brett Howden. Henrik Karlsson's a little bit further down, but you give him up. In terms of on the wing, you give up Vitaly Kravtsov if you have to. Jack Eichel is better than Vitaly Kravtsov. Put up or shut up here. Defensively, whether it's a Libor Hayek, Keandre Miller, you might say, please God, no. Tony DeAngelo might move in this deal, which would be hilarious. But Nils Lundqvist, you have the assets. Even in goal, Tyler Wall, Olaf Lindbaum. You have the assets. You have the prospects. You have the roster players. You have the picks. There is no reason that the New York Rangers can't get this deal done. And if we are to believe their official story of why they're cleaning house, well, now's the time to put up or shut up and acquire Jack Eichel to push you over the edge there. So what does a Rangers deal look like? I don't know, but they have the pieces to get it done. Let's see it happen.
Yeah. So, obviously we could be here all day if we got into specifics, but I don't even think it's just the Rangers. I think, I'm
glad you mentioned that, because I legitimately think, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, I legitimately think you can make an argument for every single team in the league that they have assets to pull this off, aside from maybe a few. Obviously, cap-wise, it could be tough for some teams. But looking here, does Anaheim have the assets to pull it off? Yes. New Jersey? Yes. Vancouver? Yes. Dispelling cap stuff. Columbus? Probably. Detroit?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about was Columbus. Because if you look at it from a...
The only team I look at where I'm like, is like San Jose, and probably Chicago has the assets, but do you want three $10 million players? Do you want to be Maple Leafs West? There's only a handful of teams maximum that you can rule out from being able to say an Eichel trade is virtually impossible.
Yeah. And so even then, I think it's a significantly smaller handful, I think, than people think about on first notice. Because if you look at the Columbus Blue Jackets, let's say next year's first, Emil Bemstrom, Alexander Texier, and Patrick Laine. That, I think, is the level of return you could expect for Jack Eichel at this point. The guy wants out. You're not going to get the same return
even then,
for him if you
I'd say that's a good return. I'd say that's a pretty damn good return from Buffalo. And there's probably a lot of Blue Jackets fans being like, no, that's way too much. So even then, if you're the Sabres, it's like, man, if that's offered by Columbus, I take that at this point.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing, too, is just it's nuts. You're going to get the Buffalo is going to get a return that will not fix the team. And I think that's the real issue here.
Well, if you trade a player of the caliber of Jack Eichel, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
That's just what it comes down to. If you trade
you're never going to win that trade.
You're never going to win that deal, ever. It's the same thing with the idea of McDavid. It was the same thing with the idea of trading Wayne Gretzky. And the Oilers did okay. And obviously they won a cup after them. But you look at that specific trade. Did they win the Gretzky trade? No. It just so happened that the rest of the team was still built well and they made things happen. So, yeah, I agree with Deej. We could be here all day long discussing trade possibilities. As I said, very few teams that...
it's going to be a long off season.
Yeah, this is...
We can do it.
Yeah, one team per podcast until it finally happens.
We'll see you in July for part 2 of this.
And in August, because it's just going to keep going and going and going. It's going to continue to be one of the main talking points. So... yeah, my opinion already based off the new information available and what's going on with this injury conversation is that, Jack Eichel is not going to be a Buffalo Sabre next year. That said, we'll move on to one of our other talking points here, talking about two of the other best in the league still. They've been two of the best in the league for the past 15 years. We're going to start off talking about Alex Ovechkin, who, for the first time in his career, has failed to hit 30 goals in a season. And Deej, all it took was a pandemic a suspension for breaking pandemic protocols, and a shortened season. Oh, and don't forget an injury to stop him from getting there. He turns 36 years old in September. Do you think he's still able to beat Gretzky? He is on 730 goals. He needs 894. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think he's got 6 more years left in him. That's the type of player he is. I think he finishes his career with 2 seasons that are close to 20 goals, but not quite there. So we'll say he needs roughly 120 in 4 or 5 years. I think he just gets there.
I'm for the first time, I'm starting to have doubts. For the first time, I'm genuinely starting to have doubts. And for the most part, it's been due to circumstances out of his control. 2 different lockouts since he's been drafted. The pandemic now, and obviously the rare bit of injuries, and of course the injury he suffered this season. I don't know at this point. Like you said, it's going to take a very good pace of him not slowing down. And then when he does start to slow down, he can't fall off a cliff in terms of that production. A big part of it might just be what happens this offseason. You know, you talk about the idea of his deal being up with Washington. I obviously don't expect Alex Ovechkin to leave Washington, but I do think a big part of this hinges on what happens with the Caps in terms of their ability to stay in contention, and if he were to leave Washington, where he goes and what that situation is there. So I still think he can make it. I think, again, removing those issues that were out of his control, he makes it no problem, basically. But again, turning 36 in September, I'm starting to have my doubts, because when a goal scorer falls off, for the most part, there have been exceptions, of course, but it really does feel like when a goal scorer falls off, they really fall off. So I think he can still make it, but for the first time, I have my doubts, Deej.
Yeah. So let's go to the northwest of that and address everybody else's favorite player of the last 20 years or so. So I like this talking point a lot, because it's fascinating when you actually look at the numbers, which is Sidney Crosby is entering this postseason number 8 all time in playoff points. He has 189 points in 168 games. He is over a point per game in the playoffs. He has 3 cups. Where will Sidney Crosby finish all time? So Sidney Crosby is 12 points away from jumping Brett Hull, Paul Coffey, and Jaromir Jagr.
Yeah.
From there,
currently on 201.
Yeah. So from there, he's another 13 points away from tying Glenn Anderson at 214, which would put him 4th all time. From there is a large gap. And then you get Gretzky, Messier, Jari Kurri. You get the greatest show on ice, that Oilers team that just could not be stopped for so many years, where they tried to change the power play rules to slow them down. That's a conversation for a different day, but a very interesting one nonetheless. I think Sidney Crosby can easily finish 4th all time. Maybe 3rd. That is, but there's no way he finishes above 3rd.
Top 2. No, not a chance in hell. So for those who are unaware, again, Jari Kurri sits at 233. As Deej said, Crosby is at 189. It would obviously take, and we had that conversation, right? Whether or not Pittsburgh would be the type of team to say, okay, if we don't make it to the second round, do we blow this up now? If they do, that could obviously very much hinder Crosby's ability to make it. The top 2 are who you would expect, and they are untouchable. It is Mark Messier in second with 295. He is 106 points above Crosby in terms of all-time playoff points. He has played quite a few more playoff games as well. And then Wayne Gretzky has 382 playoff points all time. In case you needed a reminder that Wayne Gretzky is the greatest of all time. I agree with you. I think Sidney Crosby likely finishes top 4 minimum, depending on what happens with the Penguins. I would be very impressed if he's able to jump Jari Kurri. I think that would, as if Sidney Crosby wasn't already a surefire Hall of Famer. If Sidney Crosby ends up top 3 all-time in playoff points, that is one of the more impressive stats he could have on top of the litany of impressive stats that he has in his career. But I agree. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out because no other active player is close. Again, Crosby's 8th, Malkin is 20th. And then the next highest active player is Patrick Kane in 43rd. And Ovi's 44th for that matter. So, I mean, nobody else is in the conversation. And obviously it's based upon the fact that, as we have mentioned before, like the Penguins have made the playoffs like 10 straight years. I think they've only missed one time with Crosby. It's unbelievable. Well, maybe not one time with Crosby, but one time in the more recent years. Obviously, early on, it was a bit shaky when he first got there. But, I mean, yeah, it's beyond interesting to watch at this stage to see how this plays out. And obviously, I think a big part of how it plays out really hinges upon this series with the Islanders.
Yeah. I wholeheartely agree. And that's the other thing, too, that's interesting is this Islanders team is they play Barry Trotz hockey, and that's obviously going to slow Sid down one way or another. And then second round up against the Bruins aren't going to let you, like, there's no way he scores a hat trick against the Bruins.
Hopefully the Bruins.
So I mean, I don't know. I think he could very well. He only needs 12 points to pass Jágr. I think there is over 50% odds that he finishes this season above Jágr.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how far they go, right? I agree with you. I mean, I can easily see the Penguins making the Final Four, for that matter. Like, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all. And it's one of the things that we've talked about on the show. How likely is it if the Penguins beat the Islanders that it's relatively smooth sailing in round 2 against Boston or Washington? Because the prevailing thought is that those two teams are going to beat the ever-loving hell out of each other, and Pittsburgh will just pick whatever's left off the bone. We'll see how that plays out. It doesn't always work out that way. Speaking of playoff teams, though, we'll quickly mention this because I think it's worthy of the praise, of course. The Colorado Avalanche have won the President's Trophy, perhaps controversially over a tiebreaker against Vegas due to, I believe, regulation wins was what it came down to. We had that question not a lot long ago about how much of a wagon is this team, and the answer is the heftiest of wagons. Cale Makar, to
Oregon
praise him
Trail.
really quickly, Deej, is now the top scoring defender in team history through 100 games played over Steve Duchesne, Sandis Oshilin, Ray Bourque, and Rob Blake. Obviously, the latter two got there once they were already well-established NHLers. Gabriel Landeskog is now 6th all-time in team history in goals with 218. He passed Peter Forsberg. And as well, I mean, there's been the doubts about Grubauer in terms of like Colorado's goaltending depth, especially compared to like a Vegas where they're like, well, Fleury, Leonard, what does Vegas have or what does Colorado have? But even like Jonas Johansson going 5-1-1 with a .913 save percentage after being dubbed the worst goalie ever seen when he got traded from Buffalo. And, proven by some other goaltenders that have played for the Avs this year, not every goalie can do well behind that defense. I'm very intrigued by Colorado's first round matchup as well, because again, you would expect them to do incredibly well. Like we talked about, not one of those teams that you expect anything crazy to happen if they weren't to make it all that far, but it really does seem like this team's, obviously just getting started over the past couple of years, and they're still going to get better. And obviously guys like Landeskog continuing to be as good as he's been, Cale Makar getting into the league and doing as well as he's done. It's just such a phenomenal team. And again, worthy of pointing out that they're going to be stricken by the President's Trophy curse and Fallen 5.
Yeah. I know. I was thinking the same thing. That is not far off. So
I mean, we'll see what happens there with Colorado as well. Again, not the biggest of talking points, but something that was worth mentioning, just due to the circumstances. I mean, especially too, you talk about those teams that had an opportunity at winning the President's Trophy this year. I mean, we talked about the haves and the have-nots, and Colorado certainly amongst the haves. Aside from that, we talked about this as well for a little bit too, DeJ. The whole head coaching idea. Chris Johnston from Sportsnet said, add Buffalo to the list of NHL teams that will start interviewing head coaching candidates, joining a list that includes Columbus, Arizona, Seattle, and the New York Rangers. Now, the Rangers, we already know, of course, fired David Quinn. They have gotten permission from the Vegas Golden Knights to talk to Gerard Gallant, who obviously is a name we've talked about a lot, in a sense of potentially going to Seattle. You never really know what's going to happen when all of these teams are in the market. It's not really surprising to hear that Buffalo's looking at a head coach. I still think the interim that they had, whose name is escaping me right now, did a pretty good job. Like, the Sabres did well once Kruger was gone. That said, I mean, Gerard Gallant, I think, is a good coach for any of these teams, particularly for the Rangers. I don't hate it.
The Don Granato. That's
Don Granato. There Granato. You go. I always want to say Tony Granato, but you look at,
because it sounds right.
Right.
Tony Granato.
You look at where Gerard Gallant could fit. Obviously, John Tortorella's name, Bruce Boudreau's name's out there a ton. Just to ask you then, Gerard Gallant, between Buffalo, Columbus, Arizona, Seattle, and the New York Rangers, who he's apparently closer to right now, shout out to that guy. Where do you think Gerard Gallant fits in best?
That's a great question. You look at where he has coached. You look at Florida. You look at Vegas. He's already coached in Columbus. He has ridden that horse. He has seen all there is to see in Columbus. And I have a feeling he doesn't want to go back. So I would imagine, based on where he has played, he would want to go to a major city. And I think it's got to be either the Rangers or the Kraken. There's no way. I will be shocked if Gerard Gallant, native of Summerside, Prince Edward Island, the most scenic beach in Canada, ends up anywhere other than Seattle or Manhattan. And
honestly, the more I think about it, maybe I do see him being more likely to go to the Rangers at this stage. Just because with Seattle, is it a feeling of been there, done that with an expansion team?
Yeah, there's a whole truck full of bullshit that comes with that.
And I still think, though, Seattle's going to be what people thought Vegas was going to be at the start. And we've talked about that, too, on the show quite a bit. The idea that, again, Vegas is only what they are due to the panic moves made by other NHL GMs, as opposed to what the rules were in place for them. I think this time, at least to a lesser extent, it might still happen. I don't think you're going to see as many GMs make those type of moves that has Vegas say, hey, wait a minute. Why do we sit here and keep Eric Brandstrom? Why do we sit here and keep Nick Suzuki? We can move these guys and win now. Like, look at what's been handed to us. With Seattle, it's obviously not going to be a Columbus or a Nashville style process. It's not going to take that long, but it's still going to be a process where I would be, talk about shocked. I would be shocked if we're talking about the Kraken making the playoffs, if we're talking about the Kraken making it to a cup final in their first year. So I could see Gerard Gallant saying, well, this is already pre-built for me. There's no growing pains here. You talk about buy-in. I just have to get these players to buy in to what I'm doing, and I get to, reap the rewards of these seeds that were planted for other people and by other people. I mean, what coach what coach in theory wouldn't want to take over a team that has as many potential young stars as the Rangers have? Shesterkin in goal, Adam Fox on defense, Lafreniere, Capo Caco, and of course already, bona fide superstars in Panarin. That is a very enticing offer just from the team perspective. And then, like you said, you talk about the fact that you're coaching an Original Six team, you're coaching in New York. I didn't see it at first, but I do think that I think Gerard Gallant's going to take this job if offered. I mean, and obviously the Rangers seem interested getting permission from Vegas, which again, they had to. Thankfully for the Rangers, though, there's no longer that rule, much like the Oilers had with Peter Chiarelli, or I think the Vancouver Canucks as well had to pay to get John Tortorella, hilariously enough. Like, that rule is not in effect anymore, so there's really no reason to not do it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there with your last point, though, Gerard Gallant has accomplished so much. Do you want to do what you just did in Vegas with a weaker roster from the ground up? Or we're the New York Rangers. We have an amazing roster. We just cleaned house. Obviously something sketchy is going on with our messaging, but everybody you'll be dealing with is brand new to this position. Chris Drury is still really young. He's only 44. So hey, here's a great roster that is set to win a cup sometime in the next 10 years. They're an Original Six team. You will be a coach of the New York Rangers. That is, I think, in and of itself, just a name value alone, incredibly appealing. Unless, taxi cabs bother you.
In which case, they just might. That might ultimately be the deciding factor. But yeah, like I said, you talk about that pre-built team. It's almost to the extent of like Julien Brisebois and Steve Yzerman, where granted the team was further along, but you look at like what Brisebois inherited from Yzerman. He didn't have to do all that much to get that team over the hump to win a cup. So again, for Drury taking over with the team that Jeff Gorton built, there's really not much I think that the new management has to do. Like I said, as long as they don't make any backward steps, I think they're good. And that is a concern. Like I said, I think that worry of, we got to win now and trying to skip the line a little bit could come back to haunt them from multiple different perspectives, actually. Aside from that, though, in terms of coaching, this question, I know you saw it and you love it. This is from a Habs fan. Should the Habs fire Ducharme? And if they should, who would be the replacement? Deej, should the Habs fire the interim head coach that just helped them get to the playoffs?
I think they should fire the coach every year they don't win the cup.
That's the expectation. They are Montreal. They are entitled, even though they have not won a cup in my lifetime. Give them cup. If not, get out. Also, be a francophone, because we're all right with... See, we're so good, we have to limit ourselves to our available coaching options by making sure that we have a francophone leading this team, and at least one in the lineup. Otherwise, what's even the point? We'd just win every year if we didn't have these self-imposed rules, right, Deej?
Yeah. You also... I'm not going to be able to pronounce this right to finish the joke, but I was really proud of it while it was a work in process. But I was like, you also have to be verified on Gazuli, which is French Twitter. But I couldn't pronounce it correctly, so it's obviously a joke's lost in translation. I don't know. Just, you can't keep chasing people out of town and expect Mary Shelley not to write a book about it or whatever. I don't know.
Two other quick questions in regards to coaching that I decided to tack on here. This is from Thomas Shea. What coaching vacancy currently open is the most appealing for a free agent coach, considering factors like ownership, team makeup, and market? Obviously, this brings us pretty much right back to those teams, right? Buffalo, no. Columbus, no. Arizona, no. So it's Seattle or New York. And I'm going to have to say Seattle because, again, I think Gerard Gallant's going to New York. So that's pretty straightforward. And Deej, unless you have anything to add to that, we get to Joe's question. If the Wings fire Jeff Blashill as their head coach, who replaces him? And I don't know if there's a go-to be honest, because with Yzerman, does Yzerman seem like the type who's going to bring in a John Tortorella based off of how that team's being built. I don't really see it, because look at who Yzerman's guy was in Tampa, and it was John Cooper. Is Bruce Boudreau that type of guy either? I don't know. I think Boudreau would be a better fit than Tortorella, but I can't help but think that, you know, Detroit's going to go for probably another guy like Blashill, who's a little bit off the radar. I feel like that often is the play. I mean, John Cooper was within the Lightning organization for a short amount of time. From 2010 to the middle of 2013 was when he was brought on as head coach, I think, as Guy Boucher was let go. So, I mean, I could easily see it being another one of those kind of under the radar selections as opposed to one of the big names. Don't really have anyone specific in mind. But that said, I mean, people talk about, I don't think Jeff Blashill's the guy long term in Detroit either. So, you know, we'll see how it all plays out. But yeah, I think it'd be more of an under the radar type of person.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you're really digging for clues, you could go through the years where Stevie Y was the general manager of Team Canada. Be like, well, who did he hire as the coach? But that's if you were like really trying to like Pepe Sylvia find this. I think, I mean, John Cooper was a lawyer that didn't start coaching hockey until his 30s. Like, obviously, there is no way for us to narrow down an existing pool, because that is Steve Yzerman's talent, is finding people who are good at stuff that other people don't realize are good at stuff. That is his ethos when it comes to drafting, hiring coaches. So your next door neighbor has just as good of a shot as anybody as being the next head coach of the Detroit Red Wings. And I think you stay with Blashill for the time being, because he's doing exactly what you need him to do, and that's beat the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Yeah. On top of that as well, I actually just realized we could move up this little quick talking point here. This comes from The Score, which I won't say The Score is... I'm not going to say they're not the most reputable at this stage, but obviously they're a step down from where they once were. They're reporting that Elaine Vino... I completely missed what you said.
I said they're a filthy rag.
There you go. Elaine Vino to return as Flyers head coach next season. Deej, if this is true, I think our regular listeners know exactly what our opinion is on this, and that it is more than likely a drastic mistake, but maybe not all that surprising given that he is a somewhat recent hire. Flyers fans, yeah, I don't know what to tell you heading into next season if he is indeed coming back, because I viewed him as the easy change to make to try and get that team back on track after one of the worst seasons in recent memory for the Flyers. Maybe not in terms of total record, but again, for expectations, thinking this team could be a cup contender and not even making it, you wouldn't think that the coach would be hanging around. But then again, Montreal might fire their head coach if they don't do anything, Deej, so who knows?
There was a really interesting interview with Elaine Vigneault a few days ago. I don't know. It was on the Delco Times. I presume the only reason they interviewed him is because he's from there. Maybe. No idea. I think it has something to do with Pennsylvania. I can't tell you much about this paper. It exists. But they had an interview with Vigneault, which was really fascinating, where he talked about COVID's effect on his ability to coach and how so many younger players, like just being stuck in the bubble, being really unable to practice fully, how it got in their heads, and how the veterans were unable to stick to their old rituals and how they practiced. And basically, he was talking about how every single player in that locker room got thrown off. And I believe the way he phrased it was, I would really enjoy coaching the Flyers in a normal year in a normal setting, like in terms of I hope I get the chance to. So I think that's really interesting that maybe they don't let him go in the offseason. Maybe they let him start next season in a hot seat.
I mean, that is a fair point, right? When you talk about teams that were very much disrupted by COVID and by injuries, I mean, Dallas comes to mind, Philly definitely comes to mind. And if that's the way you want to look at it, is this season would have gone so much better had it not been for these circumstances, then sure, bring Elaine Vino back. I'm not sure if I'm personally entirely sold on that, if it wasn't for this, they would be what we thought they were going to be. But I can at least see it. So I agree. I still would have made the move, and maybe that's why I don't have that job. Still probably would have made that change, just because off of Elaine Vino, I mean, it's been a decade since he's been to a cup final. Actually, no, he made it with the Rangers, but I don't know. I haven't viewed his recent run of form in the past 5 years as something worth being like, let's give this guy another chance. But then again, the money they're paying him, they kind of have to. So we'll see. We'll see. For all we know, Philly might finally be the might come back next year, be the team we thought they were going to be, and be right back in cup contention. As well as that, again, because we have just a bunch of these topics to cover here. And again, we thank all of you that have stuck with us at this point. We do need to get into one negative topic that I wasn't sure if I wanted to bring up, but I do, just for the sake of being able to say it's going to be a pretty rough year. Because while it doesn't seem like it at all, we are 10 years removed from one of the worst years in hockey history in terms of how things played out in the sport. Obviously 2011 for me, as a Bruins fan, it was great, but you look at everything else that happened in that calendar year, it was a bad year. And we started off May 13th yesterday, was the 10th anniversary of Derek Bogart's passing, which doesn't seem possible. 28 years old, believe it was an overdose if I'm not mistaken. Obviously the discussion over enforcers and how that plays out and the effects of it's been discussed to death now over the past 10 years, for lack of a better phrase there. And obviously it's going to be even more difficult. Wade Belak, Rick Rippon, the locomotive plane crash, all of that happened in 2011. Just, again, absolutely crazy to think that it's been a decade at this stage. But, I think, you look at it and see what's changed, especially in regards to the three guys who were known as enforcers, what's happened and what's changed in terms of the hockey culture, what hasn't and still is needing to get to a better spot. And then obviously too, it's one of those things you think back to the locomotive plane crash, and it sucks, right? There's so many examples of, hey, I can't go back. And obviously I'm not saying this is a grievance, but you go back and you play an older hockey video game and you're just like, oh man, yep, there's that name from the crash, and Pavel Dimitra and Carlos Skrastic and so many guys, where it's like I said, it's just hard to believe that it's been 10 years at this point since all of that. And again, these moments are going to come up throughout the year where it's going to be a little bit depressing, but all of them have their place in hockey history for sure. But yeah, I just can't help but reiterate to you, man, how the hell is it? What is time? What is time? I think is my general theme.
Yeah.
On a more,
I think you're right.
Yeah. On a more positive note, didn't want to necessarily bring down the show, but like I said, I felt like I would have been remiss to not bring it up. We do have some positive news talking about things getting to where they need to be. And this came out, I believe, from Sportsnet. The NHL has informed both the PWHPA, which is the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association, and the NWHL, the National Women's Hockey League, that it is not in a position to operate a women's league for the foreseeable future. But it also indicated that if the two entities come together with a plan, that the NHL would be inclined to participate. So the NHL is saying, look, we're not going to go full NBA, WNBA with this, but if these two sides can work together, they will get more than likely that assistance that they need to make it even more sustainable, which yes, please. I mean, again, we've talked about that on this show as well, and it's interesting how many topics we've been able to revisit today. Just the idea, and, I've mentioned too with the Players Association there, you have the likes of the Hillary Knights, the Marie-Philippe Poulins of the world that are some of the best hockey players in the world, not just women's hockey players, that aren't currently playing full-time because they didn't believe in what the NWHL, what their game plan was moving forward in the aftermath of the CWHL folding. So it's one of those things where it's like you just hope this can come together, and it's I'm somewhat optimistic because honestly, those players, the Knights, the Poulins of the world, shouldn't really go down as the new generation Hayley Wickenheiser, Cami Granato types, where you say, what could you already look at the effect of what Hayley Wickenheiser's done in terms of hockey. What more could she have done had there been a consistent women's hockey league for her to consistently show off her talents in? What more could she have done? And I don't want that what if with Knight and Poulin and players like that. And you do talk about, though, the game has grown from the women's side a ton already. I mean, Deej, we're coming up on 10 years just about. It was NHL 13 that Hayley Wickenheiser and Angela Ruggiero were in NHL 13. And obviously, I think a lot of people by this point were hoping the women's leagues will be in by NHL 21, right? And not quite, but obviously, that's what I think everybody wants to see. I mean, aside from the jackasses, who cares, blah, 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 all that shit that, ignore the trolls, essentially. But yeah, the idea of a sustained women's league that players are getting paid, it's not necessarily in danger of folding, being able to see them get involved, which I imagine EA would love to do what 2K has done with NBA, where they have the WNBA in the video game, and having the NWHL in the EA NHL games would be massive. There's still so much potential and so far to go, but hopefully the NHL saying we can assist if you can work this out is enough to give these two sides a push to make sure that in terms of the women's game, it's just constantly the best players on the ice at all times.
Yeah. There's so much business stuff that needs to be worked out right now. It's, for me, I think the most unfortunate thing in all of this, and one of the reasons that there's such an unfortunate lack, is the collapse of the CWHL. I think more than anything, that's what led to the lack of further business deals, is this constant feeling of instability. And I don't know. I don't know what needs to happen to fix all this. I mean, every Winter Olympics, I watch shit out of men's hockey. I watch shit out of women's hockey. Hockey's hockey. I love hockey. Hockey. Yeah, I think what they need to do is that this next Winter Olympics needs to be, I think you try and build whatever foundation you can with whatever money you can scrap together, and then you use this upcoming Winter Olympics as, it's very unfortunately your make or break point, where this is where it happens or it doesn't happen. So I don't know. I mean, there's not enough money in women's sports. That's just how it is. And you need something like an incredible playoff run, or not playoff, but incredible Olympic run to spark that money and to show people these things are marketable and that there are marketable players. Really, that's what it starts with, is you need 3 marketable players. You need the box of Wheaties. You need somebody hawking vitamin water on Sunday afternoons while people are watching football. And that's, as ridiculous as that sounds, that's legitimately how this starts. And so you just use this upcoming Winter Olympics to figure out who your marketable players are, and you put them everywhere. You do exactly what women's soccer is doing.
And we'll see if the NWHL is better than the NHL at that, because as it is, the NHL probably doesn't do a good enough job at marketing their star players. Another quick thing, Deej, to kind of, lighten up the mood after having to bring it down for a second. This is from Dennis Bernstein on the topic of Drew Doughty. If significant moves aren't made by the Kings front office this summer, will Drew Doughty be happy with the direction the franchise is going? He thought about the answer and then said no. Which, first and foremost, I think the Kings are on a good path. Secondly, this is from a different article from an anonymous NHL player on the Leafs. Guess what? I don't think any of the teams in the Canadian division are good. How the fuck can they win the Stanley Cup when they play no defense? I just don't think their forwards care enough about defense to win. I don't think they're actually good. Odds that Drew Doughty is the one to make that statement, Deej. Because I'm pretty sure both statements are from Drew Doughty. I can't imagine who else it would be.
I mean, yeah, there was definitely a certain Drew Dowdiness to those anonymous statements. However, based on... So I don't know. So it's really hard for me to pick a player, but just because Craig Kustance wrote the article, it has to be somebody from Detroit or Chicago, right? Just because that's where he covers, those are his markets, and that's where he's going to have connections.
I hope it's somebody like Mark Stahl, who has the reputation of being a nice guy, who's just like, fuck the Leafs.
It's like Jonathan Taves.
I want it to just be like the nicest guy possible. That'd be delightful. But yeah, I don't know what that says about Drew Doughty, that everyone's like, that was definitely Drew Doughty. But yeah, interesting. I mean, you mentioned that earlier, though, like, right? The thought of like Canadian teams don't play defense. It's definitely a common thought. We'll see how it plays out. I don't know. I'm intrigued by that. If you have nothing else to add there, a couple of quick other talking points here as we like to wrap things up. I did not think we'd approach 2 hours on this show, but here we are. To rapid fire this, Taylor Hall on playing in Boston. It's been 16 games, and it's probably been some of the more enjoyable hockey I've ever played. I hope there's more to come. Hall has 14 points in 16 games as a Bruin, 8 goals and 6 assists, playing alongside David Krejci, who has 21 points in those 16 games, averaging over a point per game with 6 goals and 15 assists. We had that talking point, Deej, in the last show of what happens, with Taylor Hall and what moves would have to be made to make that happen. The thing is, though, too, I mean, I'm looking at it, and you can tell, like, some of the moves are already in the works. I mean, the Bruins announced that Jeremy Swayman will be the backup to Tuukka Rask in the playoffs, not Yaroslav Halak. So I'm intrigued, obviously. I'm intrigued, obviously, for what's going to happen with the Bruins moving forward, but not surprising, I'd say, especially after, Taylor Hall escaped from the great fog of Buffalo. Not surprising in the least to hear, like, hey, I'm having fun. I'd like to stay, please. Hopefully that means he'd be willing to take a bit of a pay cut to try and help keep the team in a very strong side.
I mean, I think Taylor Hall definitely transformed this team, and I think that Boston is very underrated, including in the Vegas sports books, for those of you gambling along at home, on how they're going to do these playoffs. But can you imagine how scary this team would be if they got someone like Sam Bennett?
If only. We do have Curtis Lazar, though, also acquired in that deal. Top line center in the penultimate game of the season, Curtis Lazar, as the Bruins fell to the Caps in the final second because Michael Raffl scored a ridiculous goal. The Bruins essentially running the Providence Bruins and nearly beating Washington. It would have been great. Even then, I probably still wouldn't have talked that much trash until the playoff series was over because, karma comes back to get you. But, yeah, I don't know. Fingers crossed that the great Taylor Hall experiment continues to bear fruit here. Aside from that, couple other talking points. I do want to shout out the Ottawa Senators again. It was pointed out by one of my favorite beat reporters' names, Craig Needles, that the Sens were 21-16-4 after a horrible start. That was a 92-point pace in an 82-game season, so they're looking good. They re-signed Artem Zub, which is a good move. He made, someone like Zaitsev around him actually look half decent. I want to also shout out from the St. Louis Blues, Ville Husso, who I have shit talked all season long as not being an NHL caliber goalie. He shut out the shut out the Minnesota Wild in a 4-0 victory. So his first shutout with the Blues. And the Blues' first shutout in over a year since March 8th of 2020. So congrats to Ville Husso for making me shut the hell up. And DeJ, our final talking point that we have here is in regards to the Tampa Bay Lightning, where I caught some heat for my opinion that the Lightning were going to be in trouble in the playoffs, because I can't say anything about Tampa without people just being like, "Well, salty, biased Bruins fan. You said the Lightning didn't wear masks. Stay hidden in your basement, loser." All the hilarious stuff like that only feeds to only feeds the laughs as opposed to me being upset about anything. But John Cooper was asked about whether or not Kucherov and Stamkos would be in the lineup, and he said, "We hope so. They're looking good now. Signs point to them being in the lineup. Of course, you have the concern over Hedman, the concern over those two. Barclay Goodrow's out. I still can't help but think Tampa's going to be in a little bit of trouble, DeJ, due to these injury concerns. I can't put 2019 out of my mind. I just can't do it."
As a hardcore Florida Panthers fan that is about to be watching my team face the Tampa Bay Lightning, my brain works in strange ways, and I don't know why this is the comparison or the allegory I want to make. I feel like Tampa, the last thing I want as a Panthers fan is for Tampa to feel like they go into this series with something to prove. That is very much... I mean, it doesn't matter how long you've been taming the tiger for. Like, you can still Siegfried and Roy you or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, this is still a very dangerous Tampa team.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think this team is scary, but Victor Hedman is so much the heart of this team. If he's hurt, I mean, you brought it up last week. Last time he was hurt, Columbus Blue Jackets swept them. Vasilevsky, the secondary heartbeat of this team, if we're in like a two hearts cow scenario. Panthers have had his number all year. Who knows what we will see? Who knows how healthy Stamkos and Kucherov really are? I don't think they suddenly got healthy this last week. I think they've either been healthy for a while or they are going into this playing hurt. I think Stamkos is playing hurt regardless. I mean, I don't know if you remember a year or two ago, famously quoted, "I have never been at 100%. After he broke his leg on that breakaway. He's just never been the same player. So it's a question of Kucherov, like, what's this team going to do? How are they going to match up? The Panthers are probably the only team in the NHL, or at least in the Central Division, that I think is deep enough to compete with this Tampa team. And it's this is a real hockey series that you are going. This is a playoff series you're going to be able to watch. Like, this is nuts. Like, I don't know a single person who's not excited for this series. I will be at the game on Sunday. No, we can't do a meetup. I will not sign autographs. That's just,
Stay
that's
away.
Just how I am. I keep the public away. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of all of this, because the last thing I want to do is underestimate a team that is very much the scariest team in hockey.
Fair enough. To end this, a tweet from Pierre LeBrun saying, "Hearing that Gallan's interview went well with the Rangers, so congrats to the New York Rangers on who will presumably be their new head coach." DeJ, do we have anything else to add here? Because we have pretty much talked about everything we could leading into the playoffs. Our next episode, we will be talking about playoff Hochi, and I am damn well excited. Again, I've said it before. I think every single first round series has the potential to be, as the kids say, a banger.
Well, yeah, let's say you're Gerard Gallant, right? And you just got out of this interview with the New York Rangers, and you're about to move to Manhattan, a city that keeps all of its foliage well-groomed and in one area. What do you do if you're Gerard Gallant? That's right. You use code Tougie, Tougie, for 20% off Manscaped. You get the carpets to match the city. Completely devoid of wildlife. Nowhere for critters to hide. You're going to be happening. You're going to be on the town. You're going to be cosmopolitan. Ready for MSG. That's right. The only thing growing in this garden will be your legacy. Once again, that's code Tougie, Tougie, for 20% off at manscaped.com. Manscaped, thank you for being a real sponsor. Don't know if you know what you got yourselves into. The lawnmower version 4.0. Manscaped, your balls will thank you. Tougie, anything to add before I use my canned closer?
That will do it. Thank you all for watching. We will see you after the beginning of the playoffs.
This has been Tougie's Take, episode 24. That's right, one episode for each hour of the day, even though they're significantly longer. Tougie's Take is a DeJ Audio podcast. DeJ Audio, you're listening to it. See you on Monday.